My name is Willow Hayes, and I am 30 years old. The scent of rain-soaked earth and my mother's lavender polish has always meant I was home. For most of my life, this scent was a comfort, a quiet anchor in a world where I often felt adrift. But today, as I stand in the familiar light of our sunroom, the fragrance feels sharp, unsettling. 10 years ago, my parents sold this house, the only home I had ever known, and in doing so, they sold a part of my history. Now, after a decade of carefully maintained distance, they have just walked into my cottage on Whisperwind Bluff, a place they believe they've rented for a quiet anniversary getaway. They have no idea it is mine. The soft thud of my mother's designer handbag on the reclaimed pine floor echoed the sudden, heavy beat of my own heart. Her face, a study in practiced elegance, flickered with an uncharacteristic uncertainty. But it was the look on my father's face that stole the air from my lungs. The slow, dawning comprehension as his eyes met mine, the flicker of disbelief hardening into a stony recognition. He was not a guest in a charming coastal rental. He was an uninvited visitor in the world I had built without him. The last time I saw them in a setting this intimate, I was 20. A quiet girl with paint-stained fingers and a heart full of dreams they deemed impractical. I drove away from their sprawling estate in Bellevue with a small inheritance from my grandmother, just enough for a down payment on a dream, and their parting words were not of encouragement, but of disappointment. They were cutting ties with a daughter who refused to fit into the frame they had designed for her. Today, as they stand before me, two figures from a life I thought I had left behind, I do not raise my voice. I don't have to. The peaceful, solid presence of this little house, the quiet confidence I have cultivated within its walls, speaks more eloquently than any words I could muster. To be a Hayes in the manicured, tech money world of Bellevue, Washington, was to understand that life was a performance. Our family was a carefully curated exhibition of success. My father, Arthur Hayes, was a venture capitalist, a man whose sharp intellect and sharper ambition had built a formidable empire. He valued outcomes, not processes. Success was measured in market share and stock prices. My mother, Caroline, was the perfect complement, a woman of inherited social grace who managed our family's image with the precision of a museum curator arranging a priceless collection. My older sister, Laurel, was their masterpiece. She was brilliant, polished, and followed the prescribed path with flawless execution, an undergraduate degree from Stanford, a law degree from Yale, and a coveted position at a prestigious Seattle law firm. My younger brother, Ethan, found his place by marrying into a family whose name carried as much weight as our own, a strategic alliance that solidified our family's position in the social stratosphere. And then there was me, the quiet sketch in a gallery of oil paintings. From the time I could hold a crayon, my world was one of line and color. While Laurel was at debate tournaments, I was in the corner of our library, illustrating the fairy tales I read. I wasn't interested in the grand, sweeping gestures of success that defined my family. I was captivated by the subtle details, the way the morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, the intricate pattern of veins on a fallen maple leaf, the fleeting, weary sadness in my father's eyes when he thought no one was watching. It's a lovely talent, Willow, my mother would say, her voice a soft, velvet-gloved dismissal as she'd glance at the detailed botanical drawings that filled my sketchbooks. But passion doesn't pay the bills. It's important to have a practical foundation. Practicality, in the Hayes vocabulary, was a synonym for a lucrative, high-status career. You have an eye for detail, my father would reason during our formal Sunday dinners. That's an asset in finance, in analysis. You could manage portfolios, see trends others miss. They saw my artist's soul not as a gift in itself, but as a raw material to be refined into something more profitable. I tried to meet them halfway. I majored in art history at the University of Washington, a compromise that felt both academic and adjacent to my passion. For 4 years, I led a double life. I was the studious daughter, writing essays on Renaissance art and Baroque architecture, while my secret, true life unfolded in the quiet hours of the night in my small apartment, where I worked on commissioned illustrations for small presses and independent authors. I was building a portfolio, a reputation, and a quiet sense of self, all under the radar of my family's expectations. My graduation was a moment of reckoning. We were dining at Canlis, the city spread below us like a blanket of stars. I clutched a letter in my lap, a contract from a well-respected publishing house in San Francisco offering me a position as a full-time illustrator for their children's literature division. It wasn't a six-figure salary, but it was a dream. I thought, naively, that this tangible proof of my viability as an artist would be enough. "I've been offered a job," I announced after the appetizers were cleared, my voice steadier than I felt. "As an illustrator. In San Francisco." A cool silence descended upon the table. My father placed his wine glass down with careful precision. My mother's smile tightened at the edges. "An illustrator?" my father said, the word dripping with condescension. "Willow, we've discussed this. I've already spoken to my contacts at Goldman Sachs. There's an analyst position waiting for you." "I don't want to be an analyst, Dad," I said, looking him in the eye. "I want to draw." What followed was not an argument, but a quiet, surgical dissection of my aspirations. My parents, using the calm, rational tones they employed to close deals, explained the instability of creative careers, the lack of a clear path to advancement, the financial precarity. They spoke of my wasted potential, the irresponsibility of turning my back on the opportunities they had provided. "If you choose this path," my father said, his voice devoid of warmth, "you choose it without our financial safety net. We will not enable a poor life decision. You'll realize your mistake eventually, dear," my mother added, her voice soft but her message clear. "And we'll be here when you do." But I didn't see it as a mistake. I saw it as a choice. My choice. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to San Francisco, my life packed into 2 suitcases. My grandmother's inheritance, a sum of $30,000 she had secretly set aside for me, was in my bank account. It felt like both a shield and a starting point. Laurel sent a curt text, "Good luck. You'll need it." Ethan didn't call. The first years in San Francisco were a lesson in hustle and humility. I lived in a tiny apartment in the outer Richmond, the fog a constant, ghostly presence. The publishing job was everything I had dreamed of creatively, but the salary was modest in one of the world's most expensive cities. I worked a second job on weekends, waiting tables at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, the smell of garlic and yeast clinging to my clothes. My life was a quiet rhythm of work and creation. I poured my heart into my illustrations, my style slowly gaining recognition in the small, insular world of children's literature. I made friends, built a community, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to build a life that was entirely my own. I tried to maintain a connection with my family. I called on holidays, sent birthday cards. The conversations were always strained, full of polite questions about my little job and unsubtle suggestions that it wasn't too late to come home and get serious. The distance between our worlds grew, a chasm of misunderstanding and disapproval. I learned of Laurel's engagement to Julian, a man from a family as prominent as ours, through a glossy announcement in a society magazine. No one had called to tell me. The final, quiet severing came when my parents sold Evergreen Gate, our childhood home. They were downsizing, they said, moving into a sleek, modern condo in downtown Seattle. They sent me a check for $5,000, what they termed my share of the nostalgia. It felt less like a gesture of inclusion and more like a final severance package. After that, the calls stopped. My career, however, began to flourish in unexpected ways. An illustration I did for a particularly poignant children's book about loss and renewal went viral. The image, a simple yet powerful rendering of a tiny green sprout emerging from a cracked stone, resonated with people. It was licensed for greeting cards, prints, and eventually became the logo for a popular wellness brand. The royalties began to trickle, then flow. With my newfound financial stability, I made a bold decision. I left the hustle of the city and bought a small, neglected cottage on a piece of land on the northern Oregon coast, a place called Whisperwind Bluff. The cottage was a wreck, but the land was magical, a wild, windswept promontory overlooking the Pacific. I spent the next 2 years, and every penny I had restoring it, transforming the dilapidated structure into a sanctuary of light and wood and glass. Here, in the quiet solitude of the coast, my work deepened. I started my own studio, Whispering Pines Press, creating illustrated paper goods and limited edition prints inspired by the natural world around me. My work, which my family had once dismissed as a hobby, had become a thriving, six-figure business. I had found my own version of success, not in boardrooms and stock markets, but in the quiet, steady work of creating beauty. And yet, some nights, as the fog rolled in from the sea, a profound loneliness would settle over me. I had built a life of my own, but I had lost my family in the process. The ache of their absence was a ghost limb, a pain for something that was no longer there. Then came the email. An inquiry through the high-end vacation rental site I occasionally used to lease my cottage when I traveled for art festivals. The name on the inquiry was Caroline Hayes, my mother. They wanted to rent the cottage for a week to celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary. My world tilted on its axis. My manager, a kind woman named Maria, handled all the bookings anonymously. My parents had no idea it was my home. They simply saw a beautiful, isolated cottage that fit their aesthetic. My first instinct was to have Maria cancel the booking, to say it was unavailable. The thought of them in my space, my sanctuary, felt like an invasion. But then, a different feeling began to surface. A quiet curiosity, a sense of a circle closing. I had built this life, this home, from the ashes of their disapproval. What would happen if they were to see it, to inhabit it, without knowing it was mine? Confirm the booking, I told Maria, my voice calm. I would not run. I would not hide. I would simply be here, in my own life, when they arrived. The day they arrived, a soft coastal mist was clinging to the pines. I watched from the window of my small, detached studio as their sleek Mercedes wound its way up my gravel driveway. My father stepped out first, his shoulders squared, his expression one of critical appraisal. My mother followed, pulling her cashmere wrap tighter around her shoulders, her eyes scanning the wild, untamed garden with a hint of disapproval. I gave them an hour to settle in before I walked over. I found them on the wide cedar deck, staring out at the panoramic view of the ocean. My father was examining the joinery of the deck railing. My mother was running a finger along the surface of the outdoor table, likely checking for dust. "Hello," I said softly. They turned, and for a moment, they simply stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the daughter they knew with the woman standing before them in this unexpected place. "Willow?" my mother breathed, her hand flying to her throat. My father's face was a mask of stoic surprise, his jaw tight. "What are you doing here?" "I live here," I said simply. "This is my home." The revelation landed in the quiet air between us, heavy and disruptive. My mother sank into one of the deck chairs, her carefully composed facade crumbling. My father remained standing, a sentinel of disbelief. "You own this place?" he asked, the question laden with a decade of unspoken assumptions about my life, my choices, my supposed failure. "I do," I said. I restored it myself. The silence that followed was thick with the things we weren't saying. The years of distance, the judgment, the quiet pain of our estrangement. It was Laurel who broke it. She and Ethan had arrived with their children while I was in my studio, and she now stepped out onto the deck, a glass of wine in her hand. "Willow." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. "What a surprise. I didn't realize you'd be joining us." The implication was clear. I was crashing their private celebration. "She wasn't invited," I said, my voice gentle but firm. She lives here. It was Ethan who spoke, stepping up beside me, his presence a quiet, supportive anchor. He had driven down from Seattle to be with me, anticipating the storm. Laurel's laugh was a brittle, sharp sound. Lives here? In this little beach shack? How quaint. It's not a shack, Laurel, Ethan said, his voice low. It's her home. And it's beautiful. The rest of the family, my aunts, uncles, cousins, began to trickle out onto the deck, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. The planned anniversary celebration had morphed into an impromptu and deeply uncomfortable family reunion. An aunt I hadn't seen in years, Aunt Sarah, rushed forward to hug me. Willow, dear, it's so good to see you. We've missed you. Her warmth was a stark contrast to the icy tension emanating from my parents and sister. The afternoon was a surreal exercise in navigating a minefield of unspoken history. I played the role of the gracious, if unexpected, host. I showed them the boundaries of my home. The main cottage was theirs for the week, but my studio was my private workspace. They admired the craftsmanship, the stunning views, the serene atmosphere, their compliments laced with a bewildered curiosity. They were seeing the evidence of a life they had believed impossible, a success they couldn't measure in their usual metrics. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and gold, I found myself alone on the deck with my father. The business you've built, he began, his voice gruff, his gaze fixed on the sea. Whispering Pines Press. Your mother saw your products in a boutique in Kirkland. She didn't realize it was yours. The admission hung in the air. They had encountered my world without even knowing it. It's doing well, I said. He nodded slowly. The illustrations, they're very good. You have a real talent. It was the first time in my life he had ever validated my art. It was a clumsy, long overdue acknowledgement, but it was a start. He cleared his throat. This house, it's a significant asset. You must have had help with the financing. It was a statement, but it was also a question. I did it on my own, I replied quietly, with the money from Grandma's inheritance and the income from my business. He absorbed this, his shoulders seeming to slump slightly under the weight of it. I see, he said, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than disappointment from him. It might have been respect. Later that night, long after my parents had retired, I found Laurel in the kitchen, staring out at the moonlit water. It's beautiful, she said, her voice softer than usual. You've done well for yourself, Willow. Thank you, I said. It must be nice, she continued, a note of something I couldn't quite identify in her voice. To just walk away from it all. The pressure, the expectations. I didn't just walk away, Laurel, I responded, my voice even. I was pushed. And I didn't walk away from it all. I walked toward something else. Something that was mine. She was quiet for a long time. Julian and I were having problems, she confessed, the words a quiet rush. He thinks I'm too focused on my career, that I've become hard. He says I've forgotten how to be happy. The admission, so raw and unexpected, hung between us. You seem happy, Willow. I am, I said. It took a long time, but I am. The conversation was interrupted by my mother's appearance. Her presence, as always, brought an immediate shift in the atmosphere. The brief moment of vulnerability between me and Laurel vanished, replaced by the familiar masks of composure. I was left alone with my mother. She prepared a cup of chamomile tea, setting it before me without a word. We were wrong, she said finally, her eyes fixed on her perfectly manicured hands. To dismiss your art. To try and force you onto a path that wasn't yours. She looked up, and in her eyes, I saw not just regret, but a profound weariness. We thought we were protecting you from a difficult life. We didn't realize we were standing in the way of a beautiful one. The apology, when it came, was not a grand, dramatic moment, but a quiet, simple truth offered in the dead of night. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it opened a door that had been closed for a decade. The next morning, I was woken by the sound of shouting. I hurried from my studio to find my father and Ethan in a heated discussion on the deck. My father was holding a set of official-looking documents. "This can't be right," he was saying, his face flushed with anger. "The property line is supposed to be at the old fence line. According to the official survey I had done last month, it's not," Ethan replied calmly, pointing to a marker stake I hadn't noticed before, driven into the ground a good 50 feet closer to their rental cottage. "This entire bluff, the part with the unobstructed view, is part of Willow's parcel." It was an old surveying error from the 70s that was never corrected. My father's face went pale. The most valuable part of the property they were standing on, the part that commanded the highest rental fees, the part with the million-dollar view, wasn't part of the rental at all. It was mine. The knowledge landed like a bomb. My family had rented a beautiful house with a world-class view, only to discover that the view belonged to the daughter they had cast aside. The atmosphere for the rest of the week was thick with tension. My father, a man used to being in control, was forced to confront a situation he could not manipulate. My mother was quiet, her usual social grace replaced by a watchful, uncertain silence. Laurel avoided me, her earlier vulnerability replaced by a resentful defensiveness. The climax came on their last day. I called a family meeting in the sun-drenched living room of the cottage. "I want to be clear about something," I began, my voice steady. "This week has been unexpected for all of us. But now we need to decide how we move forward." "What do you mean?" my father asked, his tone wary. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "I'm not going to build a fence or sell this part of the land to a developer who will put up a monstrosity. That's not who I am." I took a breath. "But I am also not the same person I was 10 years ago. I will not be dismissed or undervalued. If we are to have any kind of relationship, it will have to be on new terms. Terms of mutual respect." "And what does that mean?" Laurel asked, her voice sharp. "It means you see me," I said. "You see my life, my work, my home, for what it is, not for what you think it should be. It means we stop pretending the last 10 years didn't happen, and we start being honest with each other." I then laid out my proposal. I would grant them a formal easement, a legal agreement that would guarantee the view from the cottage would remain unobstructed, preserving its value and beauty. In return, I asked for nothing more than the respect and acknowledgement I had been denied for so long. It was a peace offering, but it was also a power move. I was demonstrating that I held the cards, but I was choosing to play them with grace, not with spite. In the end, they agreed. The legal documents were drawn up, a quiet treaty signed in the heart of the home I had built. It wasn't a magical, happy ending. The wounds were too deep for that. But it was a beginning. Months later, I stood on Whisperwind Bluff, watching the autumn sun set over the ocean. The air was crisp, the sky a blaze of color. My relationship with my family was still a work in progress, a series of tentative phone calls and cautious holiday visits. Laurel had started therapy. My father had begun to ask me questions about my business, a new, genuine interest in his voice. My mother had sent me a framed print of one of my grandmother's old botanical sketches, a silent acknowledgement of the legacy I was truly carrying on. It was not the family I had once longed for, but perhaps it was something more real. A family defined not by perfect harmony, but by the difficult, necessary work of seeing each other clearly, of respecting differences, and of choosing, day by day, to keep the door open. My home, my sanctuary, was no longer just a refuge from my past, but a bridge to a possible future. I had learned that the strongest foundations are not built on the approval of others, but on the quiet, unshakable bedrock of self-respect. And I had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful view is the one you create for yourself, after you've had the courage to walk away from the one that was holding you back.